Dark forests, lonely campsites, and the silent expanse of nature, these places hold a powerful draw for anyone who craves both peace and a little touch of danger. There's something thrilling about packing up your gear, trekking far off the beaten path, and spending the night beneath the stars. But sometimes, the quiet of the wild conceals unsettling secrets. Stories of abandoned tents, cryptic visitors, and eerie voices in the night have a way of making us question if solitude is truly as comforting as it seems. What you're about to hear are 3 accounts where the great outdoors became a stage for real fear. Each tale starts innocently enough, with the promise of relaxation, family fun, or a needed escape, but ends with haunting moments no one would want to relive. If you've ever wondered what lies beyond the edge of the campfire's glow, these stories might make you think twice about that next weekend getaway. One camper found himself caught in a personal storm that followed him into the remote Rockies. A group of cousins discovered that the woods behind their uncle's property weren't as empty as they'd hoped. And finally, a father and son duo who simply wanted to enjoy an off-season campground came face to face with something they still struggle to explain. Get comfortable, but don't let your guard down. These accounts may leave you glancing over your shoulder the next time you venture into the dark. Rocky Mountain Detox. In the first story, a man decided to escape the suffocating chaos of the world during the lockdown of 2020. He'd been dealing with personal pressures long before the pandemic began. A career mishap led several people to despise him. Threatening messages flooded his phone, and he found himself unable to trust the simplest text that appeared on his screen. When most people stayed cooped up inside, he took the opposite route. He ventured to Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, eager for that crisp mountain air and an emptiness he hoped would calm his mind. It was still winter, and the park felt deserted. He parked his truck and hiked through a thin layer of snow that crunched loudly under each step. At last, he reached a creek that flowed steadily, undisturbed by ice. Settling in, he pitched his tent, gathered firewood, and cooked sausages. As the sky dimmed, at first it seemed perfect. No nagging phone calls, no angry faces, just him and the wilderness. But as the shadows lengthened, an old anxiety buzzed in the back of his mind. He tried to ignore it, blaming it on the memory of all those threats he once received. Little did he know, the night had more in store than simple paranoia. But that wasn't the whole story. An unwelcome visitor, soon after nightfall, he lit his headlamp and relaxed by the fire, even indulging in a little weed to take the edge off. That's when his phone buzzed. At first, he thought maybe it was family checking in, but his heart raced. When the messages started, "How's your camping going, buddy?" "Then it's beautiful out here, and I see why you came." Dread settled in. No one was supposed to know exactly where he was. With paranoia hitting hard, he scanned the woods, seeing nothing but darkness. He could almost feel a presence just beyond. His headlamp's limited glow. Trying to steady his nerves, he retreated into his tent, phone in hand. One more text arrived. Doesn't matter anymore. Then silence. He forced himself to watch random videos, hoping a true crime documentary would distract him. An ironic choice, considering his current situation. Eventually, the quiet nights of a winter forest closed in, amplifying every tiny sound. Then came the distinct crunch of steps in the snow. They halted just outside his tent, no more than a few feet away. A sudden flash, like a camera, or a quick sweep of a flashlight, lit the tent walls. He felt exposed, his heart pounding. Not long after, his phone buzzed once more, displaying a photo of his own tent from the outside. The message, "Have a good night's sleep." Panic morphed into resolve, and he grabbed the handgun he'd brought for self-defense. Charging out of the tent, he fired 2 deafening shots into the frigid night air. He heard footsteps dash away, fading quickly into the dark. The harassing texts stopped as abruptly as they'd begun, but he spent the rest of the night wide awake, adrenaline coursing through him like a jolt of electricity. Dawn arrived as a lifeline, and he was relieved to find no further trace of the intruder. 5 years later, those messages have never resumed. But the question remains, who followed him, and how did they know he'd be there? And that was just the beginning. Fall Traditions and Childhood, Excitement second story. Shifts to a group of cousins who traveled to northern Michigan every October. Their Uncle Jim owned a sprawling 4-acre property, complete with a spacious old house and a dense patch of forest out back. Each fall, the family gathered for a weekend of bonfires, hayrides, and hearty dinners. The cousins and siblings shared rooms, sneaking in games of tag or board games late into the night. In this particular year, though, 4 of the boys, brothers and cousins ranging in age from 9 to 13, wanted a bigger adventure. They convinced their slightly tipsy dads to let them pitch a tent deep into the woods. With flashlights in hand, their dads guided them well past the tree line, past the red markings that indicated Uncle Jim's property boundary. Finally, they reached a small, mossy clearing. Their dads helped set up a large tent meant to hold the 4 boys. Proud of their rugged plan, the boys prepped sleeping bags, pillows, and a deck of Uno cards. Darkness loomed early in the fall air, so after everything was set, they all trooped back to the house for dinner, ready to return to the tent at bedtime. Nobody expected that a pleasant night of ghost stories and card games would soon morph into the sort of terror that locks itself in your memory for good. But there was more lurking in those woods. Screams in the night. When the boys ventured back into the tent later that night, they were full of youthful excitement. With flashlights aimed at their card game, they giggled over Uno, trading jabs and jokes for at least half an hour. Then a sound broke through the casual conversation. A sharp, distant scream that seemed to come from somewhere in the forest. They paused, hearts pounding. One of them reassured the group it was probably just a fox, notorious for screams that resemble a woman's cry. Slightly on edge but still brave, they went back to playing cards. Before long, a second scream tore through the night. This time, it was closer, louder, and it sounded far too human to brush off. Anxiety seized them, but they agreed to keep calm. They killed their flashlights, sank into their sleeping bags, and listened in silence. Moments later, leaves crunched in rapid succession, approaching the tent. All at once, something or someone grabbed hold of the tent and began shaking it violently. The children shrieked, both in terror and in an attempt to scare off the intruder. In a panicked dash, they zipped open the tent flap and sprinted back toward the house, adrenaline surging with every step. Their families were already outside, alarmed by the screams. Moms and dads rushed to gather the frightened boys, who described the horrifying tent attack. Uncle Jim and one of the fathers grabbed rifles and combed the woods, finding no trace of anyone. To this day, they have no explanation for the screams and the tent shaking. The kids never attempted another overnight stay in those woods. But, for some people, the woods hold far stranger encounters. The Quiet Campground Getaway, the third story, takes us to a father-son camping trip that should have been a relaxing adventure. They picked a scenic, tourist-friendly campground set, deep in the countryside. The area had an intriguing Native American history, with trails, zip lines, and well-maintained facilities. Their first day and night were picture-perfect. Families occupied neighboring campsites, campfires dotted the grounds, and the comfortable chatter of laughter and sizzling hot dogs filled the air. But as fate would have it, the father and son learned on the second day that they would be the only campers left for the remainder of their stay. Naturally, they felt a surge of excitement. Having the campground to themselves meant solitude, open trails, and no noise but the wind and wildlife. They spent hours hiking, fishing, and snapping photos of the colorful landscape. But that second evening felt off from the start. The air seemed heavier, and the setting sun cast a strange tint on the trees. While strolling to the park's information center to charge their phones, they shared a nervous laugh about how the woods felt oddly endless, as if they were crossing into unfamiliar territory. The father made a remark. "It feels like we're in a dream, doesn't it?" His son couldn't have agreed more. But nightfall would bring a far stranger twist. Circled by darkness, after dinner, they lit a fire and tried to shake off the looming unease. The father popped open a beer, and the son smoked a little weed, an unconventional but friendly moment between them. They even listened to a creepy podcast by the river, joking about embracing the spooky vibes. Once back at their campsite, though, the real tension began. A thunderous crash echoed through the trees, so loud it made their hearts jump. It seemed to come from somewhere near the water. They grabbed flashlights, aimed them into the darkness, but saw nothing beyond the thin beam's reach. A second crash followed, this time more distant, but just as ominous. They shone their lights again, peering around with no results. Then came a third, disturbingly closer. The father and son locked eyes, adrenaline coursing. It was as if something massive was maneuvering around them, choosing strategic spots to sound off. By the fourth crash, it seemed only yards away. They hurried inside their tent, doused the fire with a final throw of wood in hopes that bright flames would deter any intruder. The father lingered at the entrance, knife clutched in his fist. Under the moonless sky, he glimpsed something, a form, or a shape so dark it swallowed the weak light of his flashlight. He tumbled into the tent, breathless, stammering, "I don't know what it is, just standing there." But the night was far from over. Unexplained terror and a mind-bending finale. Inside the tent, they cowered in silence. A low hum began to vibrate the air, growing into a disturbing frequency that made their chests tighten. It felt alive, as if invisible waves were pulsing around them. Then came a guttural noise unlike any animal sound they'd ever heard. Something raw, almost alien. Every hair on their bodies seemed to stand on end. The father sat near the zipper, still gripping that knife. The son lay flat, pinned by fear. They couldn't bring themselves to look out the small mesh window, terrified of locking eyes with whatever lurked outside, and just when their panic peaked, they both blacked out. Not drifted off, but snapped into unconsciousness, as if a switch were flipped. The next thing they knew, they woke in a daze, both phones inexplicably dead despite having been charged. The fire they'd stoked had burned down to a mere pile of ash. Outside, everything was still pitch black, making them question if any time had actually passed. They stumbled around, confirming their surroundings, their gear, and themselves were all intact. That feeling of being hunted lingered, a crawling sensation across the skin. They spent the rest of the night in restless silence, waiting for daylight to break the spell. Once morning came, they packed up with shaking hands, left the campground, and vowed never to return. To this day, they struggle to piece together what happened in those eerie hours. But even after these unsettling experiences, there's one final question to ask. Conclusion: in each of these stories, isolation in nature turned from comforting to horrifying in the blink of an eye. For one camper, a private retreat in the Rocky Mountains became a horrifying confrontation with someone who refused to let him forget past mistakes. For a group of cousins enjoying an annual family trip, a single night in their uncle's woods delivered a chilling reminder that not all screams can be dismissed as animal calls. And for a father and son in a tourist-friendly campground, and my dear, ordinary getaway twisted into an inexplicable event that even they can't fully articulate. It's easy to romanticize camping trips as liberating escapes from the daily grind. But these accounts reveal how thin the line is between relaxation and fear, especially once you step away from civilization. Late at night, when your only light comes from a campfire, you might question every flicker beyond the tree line. Zao, that just a branch in the wind or a stranger's silhouette? Did you really hear footsteps, or was it just your imagination racing against the silence? After hearing these stories, you may think twice about venturing out solo, or you might find yourself drawn to test your nerves. Either way, remember that the wilderness is indifferent to your presence, And sometimes, you'll stumble upon things, human or otherwise, that don't want you there. The next time you set up camp under the stars, just be sure you're prepared for what might be quietly watching.